Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we're going to explore the idea of mind energy, as told by Betty Shine, a former opera singer, therapist for 40 years, as well as a medium and healer. I learned about her when I was listening to a program where David Icke, who is an author of several books, a former semi-professional footballer, sports journalist, and sports broadcaster, he mentioned that on one occasion he was out at a coffee shop and somehow he was drawn like a magnet to a bookstore where he randomly picked up a book written by Betty Shine. It happened that he was seeking help for his debilitating arthritis and he was looking for alternative healing methods. He met up with Betty Shine, and after that he had a strong urge to go to Peru, which he did, and shortly after that trip he has been warning for nearly 30 years of an oncoming global Orwellian state in which a tiny few would enslave humanity through control of finance, government, media, and military police, with a surveillance of a microchipped population. But that's for a different conversation. He has some interesting theories which fall under the cover of conspiracy and has caused him to be banned from entering several countries. But none of that has stopped the awakening that he had after meeting with Betty Shine. In this book titled Mind to Mind, Betty writes from a first-person perspective about how she became aware of her expanded abilities and her personal experiences. In telling her story, I appreciated that she came across as genuine and not stuffy as someone with special powers or someone that you would have to run from because she carried a bag of mugwort and frog legs. Her abilities as a spiritual healer and communicating with incorporeal entities was as natural to her as someone that has a cute sense of smell or the propensity to be a natural gymnast. And in that nonchalant perspective, she has a way of demystifying and removing the taboo behind a topic that has been talked about since man has been looking up at the stars. I invite you now to join me on this 4-part book series where Betty will talk about mind energy. I now turn the page. Mind to Mind by Betty Shine. A quote by Betty Shine. In the beginning was the Word, the spoken word, and much later the written word. Communication depends on words. There would be no progress without them, and the words in this book are the golden threads that continue to weave a story from the beginning of man to the present day. End quote. Come in, Betty. Your mother Alice has been waiting for you. I had just entered a darkened room lit by the glow of a small red lamp, and a tall, slim man was shaking my hand. I had never visited a medium before, and I had only because I was desperate. Now I nearly ran away. Charles Horry looked kindly enough, but how on earth did he know my first name, let alone the name of my mother, who had been dead for 5 years? As soon as I was seated, he said, "Your mother has been waiting to communicate with you for a long time. She would like to ask your forgiveness." I was startled. I already knew that my mother had been trying to communicate with me, but I couldn't think of anything I had to forgive her for. Mr. Horry went on. "She says she could have given you more time. That did make some sense. Now she is giving you something you always wanted, but in a different way." "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know." For a few moments Mr. Horry sat in silence, his head tilted as though listening. Then he said, "You are going to be a great healer." Me? A healer? This was ridiculous. It wasn't what I'd come to hear at all. How could I heal others when I was ill myself? My thoughts raced as he leaned forward. "You have been ill for 7 years." That was true. I had decided to see a medium because I had been troubled for the last few years by inexplicable attacks of dizziness and palpitations. Lately, they had been getting worse, and I was afraid I was going to die. He went on, "You have been a very obstinate woman. A doctor has been trying to work through you all this time, and you haven't been listening. This is what has made you ill, because you haven't been using the healing energy that was built up in your system. Once you start healing, you will be better." Then he delivered another bombshell. "You are also a medium, and you have been developing your mediumship through the focus that was chosen for you, hand reading. It was true that for many years I had been doing medical hand analysis for friends, but mediumship? This will now stop. In future, you will have the knowledge without using the hands as a focus." My expression must have shown how I felt about becoming a medium. Mr. Horry looked at me quite sternly, so I sat quietly, listening to the rest of his message. "In the next 3 months, you will not only have the ability to see spirit people, you will also hear them." He didn't know, of course, that I had already seen spirit people more than once. "You will have clairvoyant sight and will be able to diagnose illnesses." I'd never thought of myself as anything but an ordinary, unimportant person. I looked at him and said, "I couldn't sit in a room with a little red light all day. It would drive me crackers." "My dear girl," he said, "that happens to be my choice. You may choose your own way of working. You will not work from the platform. All of your work will be confidential." Then he took my hand and held it while he said, "Remember everything you have been told. There are many psychics in the world, but few are chosen." I thought, whoever does the choosing must have made a mistake. I'm sure they've got the wrong one. My picture of psychics simply didn't tally with my picture of myself. Mr. Horry looked at me a little sadly. "You know, it doesn't give me any pleasure telling you this. It's an extremely difficult path to follow, and you will have to spend the rest of your life helping others. It's not a job I would have chosen. Like you, I had no choice, but unlike yourself, I can only sit here passing on messages. I could never heal. I don't have that kind of power." "But how the hell can I heal people?" I burst out. "You already are healing people," he told me. "You've been holding people's hands when you read them, haven't you? Well, you've been healing them. Go away and try it." The whole sitting lasted about an hour. Mr. Horry told me more about my past, my future, my healing career. There was so much that I really couldn't take it all in. It was all totally unexpected and rather frightening. As he drew to a close, he told me, "You are the most powerful psychic I have ever met in the 30 years I have been doing this work, and you have a great future as a healer. You will achieve incredible results, and you will travel all over the world." I stumbled out into the daylight and reeled back to work, wondering what on earth I was going to tell my husband and daughter. Back in my office, unable to concentrate, I went over and over the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it. I was beginning to see myself in a new light. I had never thought of myself as a psychic. Yet I realized that many of the things which had happened to me, which I had taken for granted, other people might consider very strange. Psychic, in fact. I had no idea that from this point on my life would never be the same again. Although Mr. Horry had given me some extraordinarily accurate information about myself, I knew nothing about healing and had no intention of becoming a healer. I certainly had no idea that at the age of 46, I was about to embark on a whole new career. Not until much later was I able to look back calmly and see that from that start, my whole life had been directed and guided towards this end, that I had in fact been on a journey, which I now think of as a journey of enlightenment. For as long as I could remember, I had been visiting another dimension. When I was 2, I smashed my forehead in a fall, affecting the optic nerve and necessitating an operation. Perhaps a blow to the head triggered my psychic abilities. Whatever the cause, one minute I was lying in a hospital cot, the next I found myself in a totally different place. I was in a garden, full of color, There were flowers like no flowers on earth, with huge, brilliantly colored trumpets which I could have crawled down, and exotic, brightly plumed birds with long tails. The colors shimmered, constantly changing in tone. A flower would be deep orange one moment and pale apricot when I looked again. It was a remarkable and very beautiful experience that had been repeated continuously throughout my life, changing in certain details as my life has changed. From that time onwards, whenever I wanted to, I could just close my eyes and travel to this magical place. As soon as I entered it, I would find myself walking down a narrow path which wound between a tall hedge of plants, seemingly placed there to prevent me from seeing what was beyond. At one point, to my right, I would pass a rectangular pool around which sat groups of people in long robes, silently communicating with each other. Some people were being dipped in the water as if they were being baptized. I never walked to the pool, but kept to the path as though I had an appointment. I would pass under an arch of leaves and then turn right to climb up a grassy slope, which felt soft and springy underfoot. At the top, I would enter a small hexagonal building with a domed roof. Inside, it was light and very peaceful. From the first, I had an inner knowledge of what to do. I would go to a chair, sit down and wait. After a while, someone would enter and sit behind me. Though I never looked round, I somehow knew that this person had a thin face, kindly eyes, and long light brown hair. He had no name and he never spoke. We simply sat in silence. What seemed like moments later, I would stand up and leave. Instantly, I would find myself back in the real world. My early childhood was very happy. I was born in Kennington 10 years before the start of the Second World War. The middle child of 3, my mother was very loving, deeply religious, and blessed with a sense of humor. My father worked in the hotel business, which meant that we saw very little of him in the evenings and even at weekends, but he was a very caring man and a lovely father. He came from a family of artists, singers, and musicians. He was a gifted amateur artist himself. We lived in a working-class community of terraced houses, a secure environment in which all the families knew and cared about each other. The highlight of the week was Sunday, when my father took the 3 of us to see his mother, who lived in an imposing Victorian house in Kennington Lane. A small woman with a powerful personality and great courage, she had given birth to 13 children, several of whom had died young. A lifelong spiritualist, she was very psychic and used to hold long conversations with her dead sons, which she would relate to us when we arrived on our weekly visits. Since we grew up with this, we accepted it as normal. My father seemed to accept it too, although not a spiritualist himself. I found my grandmother fascinating. She often made accurate predictions about my future events. Even my mother had to admit that she was often right, although spiritualism was quite at odds with her high church of beliefs. Sometimes I too knew when things were going to happen. I remember telling my mother correctly that a neighbor was going to die. She told me quite sharply not to say such things. I think she felt that by voicing them, I was actually bringing them out. Anything smacking of the psychic terrified her. I loved going to church, not because I was particularly religious, but because I welcomed any opportunity to sing. When I was about 8, my mother was horrified one Sunday to find me singing in the street with the Salvation Army. I was thoroughly enjoying myself and was mortified when she dragged me away in disgrace. Not only was I singing in the street, but with the Salvation Army of all things. At school and at home, I was always being told off for daydreaming. It was so easy to slip into my other world for a few minutes that I did it without thinking. Sometimes my mother would say, "You've been somewhere else, haven't you?" But when I told her about my journeys, she dismissed them as daydreams. I know now that my garden was and is absolutely real, existing in another dimension. I also know that during my visits there, I was being taught telepathically by my silent companion. For when I returned, I would be aware of things that no one else had taught me. For example, I understood as a very small child the spiritual law that whatever you give out, you get back. This made me very anxious when I heard my mother running down a friend behind her back. I knew that it would hurt her and told her so. I always felt extremely close to nature. I could hear the trees talking to each other, and when I lay on the ground in our local park, I could hear the grass growing. When I told my mother this, she used to laugh at my imagination. Later in the country, I felt the streams were talking to me. From a very early age, I could also hear a man's voice speaking softly in my ear from time to time. I knew that he was a different person from my silent teacher. He was very protective. He would say, "Stop," as I was about to run across a road without looking, or before I did something forbidden at school. At other times, he reassured me when my courage was failing, or gave me advice about my schoolwork. I never connected these experiences with my grandmother's psychic powers or my mother's religious beliefs. My grandmother's discussion about her dead sons were always very matter-of-fact, and she never mentioned spirits. My mother told me that we all have a guardian angel who is always with us, an idea I found quite terrifying. I used to look around for it, thinking it was disapprovingly watching everything I did. My protective voice was simply a normal part of life, and I assumed that everyone heard voices. Then when I was about 8, I mentioned to my best friend something this man had said. "What man?" she asked. "This man who speaks to me. Haven't you got a man speaking to you?" "No," said my friend, giving me an odd look. "That sounds really weird." I was genuinely surprised to learn that she didn't have a person, but from then on, I kept quiet about mine. My first 10 years were perhaps the happiest of my life. Then came the war. The next thing I knew, we were being evacuated, sent to the country for our safety away from the London bombs. My brother and sister went together, but for some reason, I was evacuated on my own. For me and many others, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Dazed by the whole situation, not understanding what war meant, I found myself with hundreds of other children being piled onto a train. From time to time, I looked out of the window. Until then, my horizons had consisted of rows and rows of houses and the local park. The country was obviously a huge park without railings. We arrived at a small Berkshire village which seemed like the end of the world. We were met by a billeting officer who handed each of us a bar of Cadbury's chocolate. I had never had such a large bar of chocolate to myself. He then trailed us round from one home to another, finally taking me to what seemed a very large house, where I was introduced to the lady and gentleman who were to look after me. The house was very gloomy, and Mr. and Mrs. E seemed very old. They must actually have been in their 60s. The first thing Mrs. E did was to take my bar of chocolate. I never saw it again. I was shocked. Stealing was a terrible thing to do, and this lady had stolen my bar of chocolate. Her husband, Tom, looked sympathetic, but under his wife's steely gaze was clearly afraid to say very much. I was afraid too, and with good reason. Life with these people was wretched. Physically and emotionally, I was starved. I was only given hot food at weekends when Mr. E was at home. It was cooked on a little meth stove and always tasted of methylated spirits. I walked 2 miles to school every day with rhubarb sandwiches for my midday meal. My tea consisted of 2 pieces of bread and margarine, and on Wednesdays, a piece of lardy cake. If I dared ask for more, the lady, as I thought of her, would tell me that she was given half a crown a week for my keep, and that was all I was going to get. I was too frightened to tell anyone, least of all my mother, in case I was sent to bed with no food at all. I remember the hunger to this day. At school, which was held in a church hall, I learned that some of my fellow evacuees were happy and comfortable. Others were very miserable and homesick. Many, included myself, were treated as servants by the people to whom they had been entrusted. I had to do those housework when I came home from school and spent Saturday mornings polishing every single piece of cutlery and silver. The lady only spoke to me to give me orders. One Sunday I tried to run away. I had walked 2 miles before Tom E. caught up with me and took me back. He told me I would get no Sunday lunch, but for some reason this threat wasn't carried out. Perhaps after all the lady had a conscience, or perhaps Tom intervened on my behalf. One night, about 4 months after my arrival, a bomb dropped immediately opposite the house, shattering all the windows. There was no electric light in my room, as Mrs. E was too mean to put blackout in the upstairs windows. When she came in with a candle, I saw a piece of glass quivering like a spear in the headboard an inch above my head. I thought, I could have been killed. I believe the shock must have opened up my psychic awareness. One evening, about a week after the blast, I was lying in bed in the dark when suddenly somebody walked in through the closed door. I stared, transfixed. I could make out the shape of a person, whether a man or a woman I couldn't tell. It was followed by others. Streams of shadowy-looking people began walking across the room and out through the opposite wall. My first thought was that when they walked through the outer wall, they would drop to the ground outside and do themselves an injury. Someone ought to warn them. Then I became scared. Not daring to disturb the lady, I pulled the sheet over my head, hoping whoever they were would go away. But whenever I popped up for air, they were still there. I must have fallen asleep at some point, but I felt as though I was awake all night. This visitation was repeated nearly every night. Eventually, I became quite used to my misty people and even quite friendly towards them. Although they ignored me, having people of my very own was a kind of comfort, especially since, while they were about, I had lost another source of comfort. I could no longer hear the voice of my invisible friend, who had so often spoken reassuringly in my ear. The probable explanation for this, although I could not know it then, is that these experiences were all normal steps in my psychic development. Other mediums have been through similar stages. There will be a phase during which one's clairaudience is developed, enabling one to hear voices. This may fade for a period of while clairvoyant sight develops. Then may follow a time when sight and sound disappear and healing comes to the fore. Finally, the medium has a full range of abilities on which to draw. It seems likely that during the period of misty people, I was simply looking into another dimension, in which these people were going about their ordinary business. There are many dimensions in the universe, some of which can be seen by psychics with clairvoyant sight. At the same time, misty friends were better than none, and when I left that house, they were all that I missed. Meanwhile, I spent more and more time visiting my other dimensional garden, and I also found another source of consolation. One evening a week, Mr. and Mrs. E locked me out of the house until late while they went to the cinema. I would spend the hours sitting in the branches of a conifer on the corner of a country lane, looking at the stars, focusing all my attention on them until I felt that I was flying among them. I believed that I was experiencing astral travel, that my mind was expanding and leaving my body, literally floating among the bright stars. As I floated, I would hear voices speaking around me in a soft, murmuring babble. They didn't seem to be speaking to me, and I couldn't really hear what they said, but it was comforting to feel I was not alone. And then suddenly, I would be back in my tree, aware that I had been far away. The 3 years deprivation left me with an inedible emotional scar, but I also retained memories of unbelievable, beautiful, mystical experiences. And I learned at an early age that beauty and the beast often go hand in hand. You have to have the one to appreciate the other. When I was 13, my mother rented a house in Surrey, and at last the family was together again. The relief was beyond belief, but things were not the same. My father, who was still working in London, went home one day to pick up some belongings. As he returned into our street, a bomb fell, reducing our house to rubble before his eyes. The blast caused what was diagnosed as pressure on the brain, and he became increasingly paralyzed. I, too, was in very poor health. I was literally skin and bone, and unable to eat and digest properly. The doctor told my mother I was suffering from acute malnutrition. He was appalled at my state. So was my mother, who was also naturally extremely angry. I was given extra rations and vouchers for cod liver oil, malt, and liver, but it was 18 months before I fully recovered. Family life was still warm, but less companionable as my mother had to work, as well as looking after my father. I was sent to a local school, where I worked hard and managed to catch up with the rest of the girls. But I found my mind journeys much more interesting. At this time, My experience changed in quality. Sometimes during a lesson, I would have the thrilling conviction that I had access to extraordinary knowledge. I would gaze vacantly at the teacher as I listened to other voices telling me about cosmic forces and universal energy. Sometimes I would feel that I was hovering about 500 feet above the ground, looking down on fields and countryside. I had always loved animals and longed to own a kitten, but my mother didn't share any enthusiasm, so refused to have animals in the house. One day, a visitor came to school to talk about opportunities for careers in the veterinary profession. At once, I knew that was what I wanted to do. I had seen a number of animals ill-treated and had always wanted to help them. I raced home to ask my mother if I could become a vet. The answer was a definite no. Nothing I could say would make her change her mind. Although I eventually stopped thinking about it, much as I loved my mother, I never really forgave her for that. I left school at 14 and went reluctantly to work in a series of offices. I could never get excited over debit and credit notes, typing and the Evening Post. One of my jobs was at Benson's, the advertising agency. In those days, Benson's girls wore smart uniforms with a little cap, which I did enjoy. It made me feel very grown up. I made the most of my leisure time by going dancing in the evenings, and at one of these dances on VE night, I met my future husband. I was 16. Leslie, an aircraft engineer, was 2 years older. For the first time, I had someone with whom I could discuss serious subjects. He also shared my interest in music. I still loved singing, and I used to practice arias around the house, learn from listening to the radio. It was a happy time. We were separated while Leslie did a 3-year stint with the occupation forces in Germany, but before he left, we got engaged. Shortly after the war ended, my father had a leucotomy to relieve the pressure on his brain. Something went terribly wrong, and when my mother next saw him, he was a completely different person. My kind, generous father had been left with persecution mania. During this worrying time, my grandmother took my mother to a demonstration by the famous spiritualist healer, the late Harry Edwards, at Kingsway Hall in London. My mother found him so inspiring that she used to write to him at his healing center in Sheer, and went to have his lectures whenever she could. She would still never have anything to do with what she called the occult, but she regarded healing as a religious activity rather than as the occult. In 1947, Leslie had just come home on leave for Christmas when our happiness was suddenly shattered. The police came on Christmas morning to tell us they had found my father's possessions on Putney Embankment. He had drowned himself. On Boxing Day, my mother went over to Kennington to tell my grandmother the news. As she reached the steps of the house, my grandmother came out and said, "You don't have to tell me. I went down with him." It was a horrible period. My father's body wasn't found for a month, and I prayed and prayed that it was all a mistake and that he was safe. Every time someone came to the door, I hoped it was him. After his death, my mother received many letters from people, often strangers, telling her how my father had helped them, often financially. We had known nothing of this. Of all my memories of my father, I remember his kindness most of all. Soon afterwards, my grandmother persuaded my mother to accompany her to a spiritualist church service with her daughter, my Aunt Lizzie. Like my mother, Aunt Lizzie was frightened of the occult and used to express her anxiety by exclaiming, "Oh, bloomy." Afterwards, a woman approached my mother and said, "I must tell you that there was a man standing beside you throughout the whole service." She went on to give an exact description of my father and then said, "He wants you all to know that now he's very happy." One night, about 6 months after his death, I woke up from a half-sleep screaming. My father had been bending over me, apparently trying to tell me something. My mother came running into the bedroom and assured me it had only been a bad dream. I knew otherwise. The experience had been much more real than a dream. It seems possible that my father was trying to impress on me that I should learn as much as possible because, after recovering from the initial shock, I suddenly acquired an insatiable thirst for knowledge. I joined all sorts of evening classes. It was exciting. I had only to enroll and I could learn anything I wanted. From that day to this, I have never wasted a moment. I have gone on learning and exploring the capacities of my mind. Leslie and I married in 1949 when I was 20, and 2 years later I had my first child, Jeffrey. When I was 17, I had been in an accident on the back of Leslie's motorbike, and 14 months after our son's birth, I developed severe and continuous back pain. I went on several hospitals, but nobody could find out what was wrong. More than one specialist told me it was all in my mind. Soon after this trouble started, I was in bed one night when I saw a tiny blue light, about the size of a penny piece, slowly traveling over the bedroom wall, across the window curtains, and eventually coming to rest above my head. I pointed it out to Leslie, but he could see nothing. Suddenly, I had an inner certainty that my mother had asked Harry Edwards to help heal my back, and that this light was somehow connected with that. The next time I saw her, she handed me a letter from his center in Sheer saying that healing would begin next day, which was the evening when the light had appeared. That was my first encounter with absent healing. I didn't know what the blue light meant, but I knew that Harry Edwards was a powerful healer. Although my pain continued, it was to last for 17 more years. It was comforting to know that from somewhere in space, perhaps even from God, I was being cared for. 4 years after Jeffrey, my daughter Janet was born, completing my family. I had no idea that I had given birth to another natural psychic. This birth, like the first one, was tough. On both occasions, I nearly lost my life. I think that each time the stress pushed me a little further along my destined path. Becoming a healer often involves going through some very difficult times. On the positive side, marriage gave me the chance to fulfill at least one of my ambitions. Early on, Leslie encouraged me to go to a singing teacher who told me that I had a dramatic coloratura voice which could be trained for opera. I thought that 6 months would be plenty. I had no idea that opera singers needed 10 years training before starting to look for any reward. It is not easy to break into the operatic world. Nevertheless, I kept at it. With much hard work, I became a freelance singer, which fitted in with having a family. It was a hectic life and fraught with disappointments. Fortunately, I had plenty of energy and Leslie was very supportive. Singing occupied some 20 years of my life, and I was very sad when I had to give it up, but that career is over, and I prefer not to look back. It is only relevant to my work now in that the training taught me to appreciate the value of discipline and to be at ease on a platform when lecturing and taking seminars. My back continued to be painful, and I often went off to sing with a bottle of Disprin in my pocket. I also suffered badly from premenstrual tension. One day, some 12 years after my marriage, I read in a booklet by Barbara Cartland that this could be relieved by taking calcium. I started taking bone meal tablets and was so impressed with the results that I began reading everything I could about vitamin and mineral therapy. This was well before the current interest in nutrition, and some of my friends thought me cranky. However, I studied the subject in depth and became quite an expert. While I was developing this interest, I had to undergo a minor gynecological operation during which my legs became locked almost over my head. When I was x-rayed in this agonizing position, it was found that I had a ruptured disc pressing on the sciatic nerve. It was an enormous relief to know that my suffering had a physical cause. I was offered surgery to end the pain, but it would have locked the vertebrae, making it impossible for me to bend, so I refused. I decided instead to cure myself with vitamin and mineral therapy and yoga. I was teaching myself yoga from a book by Indra Devi, a well-known Indian teacher, and the whole family used to join in and gave Janet a good start. She now teaches yoga herself. My back wasn't completely cured until some years later. I had been told that as I grew older, the ruptured disc would shrivel and stop putting pressure on the nerve. When we went to live in a hot climate, this speeded up this process. But I don't think my cure would have been so complete if I hadn't strengthened my spinal muscles with yoga and taken lots of vitamins. Meanwhile, It was only my ability to leave my body and find another dimension that enabled me to carry on. Some inner urge was pushing me to investigate other aspects of health, and I also became fascinated by hand reading. On my 30th birthday, my children had given me a book on palmistry. It was the start of a 16-year study which led me into medical hand analysis. This is quite a fine art. I learned to take palm prints using printer's ink and a sheet of glass in order to examine the tiny dots and breaks in the lines which reveal a person's health and nutritional status. I began reading the hands of friends, relations, and colleagues. Everyone who called left our house with inky palms. I enjoyed it, and my knowledge of vitamin and mineral therapy enabled me to advise people on what supplements they needed. I found that I was able to help a lot of people with their problems, emotional as well as physical. Some people regarded my palm reading as the occult, but I always denied this strenuously. To me, it was clearly quite scientific, and I never thought of myself as psychic. Yet, throughout these years, some strange things happened, of the kind known as psychic phenomena. As soon as we had moved into our own home, I noticed that objects were repeatedly being moved. I would put a watch down on a dressing table, and when I looked for it, it was gone. Then, when I looked again a little later, there it would be. I think many people have this experience without realizing it, because the obvious explanation is that one hasn't been looking properly. But this happened too often to be explained away so simply. I used to hear conversations going on in the street outside in the middle of the night, often gossipy conversations between two women. I used to jump out of bed in annoyance, but could see no one, and Leslie couldn't hear the voices at all. I don't think that these were ghosts, rather that my mind was going back in time to tune into conversations that had happened some time before. One night, I dreamed that a friend of my mother, who had been in a coma for a year, came to tell me she had died. She gave me some specific instructions. Everyone was to buy a separate wreath and not put their money towards one large one. At 6 o'clock next morning, I rang my mother to tell her, apologizing for ringing so early. She replied, "Don't worry, I heard about it an hour ago." We had to laugh over the instructions. During her lifetime, the lady had been constantly giving orders. In those days, I said very little about these experiences, except to Leslie, who was forced to share them. I knew that people would think me odd. I also felt that they were special to me, and that I wasn't meant to talk about them. We had been married 20 years. The children were growing up, and I was totally occupied with singing, vitamin and mineral therapy, hand analysis, and yoga. Then, from 1967 to 1969, we went through 2 incredible difficult years, fraught with family problems and tragedies. I became very low-spirited and run down, and when my mother died after a stroke, I was so shaken that we decided to emigrate to Spain and begin a new life. Leslie had his own business by now and planned to start one out there. I hated giving up my singing, but I was still suffering terribly with my back, especially in cold weather. There seemed to be nothing to keep us in England, and shortly after my mother's death, we left for Spain. Only after building ourselves a beautiful villa did we discover that it was impossible to get the necessary permits to start a business. Leslie had to return to England, while I stayed on to recover my health. I was out there for 4 years in all. Jeffrey was married, and Janet, now 16, left school and joined me in Spain, where she continued studying on her own and taught herself to type. Gradually, I recuperated from our recent troubles. I walked the hills with my dog and cat, absorbing nature and feeling at one with the earth and sky. Life was very basic and extremely hard, but the difficulties of daily living helped me to reconsider my values. I continued to visit my other dimension. I always came back feeling more positive and with greater peace of mind, which helped me with many decisions I had to take in Leslie's absence. The view from the villa was wonderful. It overlooked a great valley leading to the sea. Looking out over the vastness gave me the same kind of feeling that I had in the garden, a feeling of total peace and uncluttered mind. Something inside was compelling me to look beyond the visible world, and I spent hours gazing at the sky above the sea and at the stars at night. I started writing poetry and short stories for hours on end, which also brought me peace. One afternoon, Janet and I were lying on twin beds, taking a siesta, when something made me open my eyes. Standing at the foot of my bed, as real as she had been in life, was my mother. I called out to her, and she smiled. "Janet," I exclaimed, "Nanny is here." Janet could see no one. She said, "Don't be silly, Nanny's dead." My mother then left the room. I got up and followed her into the passage. It was empty. I ran from one room to another looking for her, but she had disappeared. I felt overwhelmed by loss. My mother's appearance had been so solidly alive, I thought she had really returned from the dead. But why had she come back? What had she wanted to say? I felt sure she had been trying to tell me something, but couldn't fathom what. About a month after my mother's visit, I suddenly started to have choking attacks. For up to an hour, I would find myself unable to breathe, while my heart palpitated wildly. It was extremely frightening, and Janet thought more than once that I was going to die. I had only just begun to learn Spanish, and after some fruitless efforts, I gave up trying to communicate my problem to the local doctors. I tried to ignore it, but the attacks continued. Since my doctors put strange symptoms down to a woman's age, I assumed that the cause must be my age, which was 42. I could find no other explanation. Janet and I became very close in Spain and began to share experiences in a way we hadn't been able to do before. There was not much to do in the evenings, so to pass the time we practiced projecting ourselves mentally to the nearest village. We'd take a look at what was going on there, which of our friends was in a particular cafe at a certain time, for instance. Next day we would check, and about 8 times out of 10 learned that we were right. We never connected this game with psychic abilities. It seemed perfectly logical to be able to extend our minds in this way. In 1974, Janet and I returned to England. Our departure was overshadowed for me by having to put my cat and dog to sleep. It was a terrible decision to have to make. I had no right to take a life, and I was very close to them. But I knew they would never survive being parted from me in quarantine, and leaving them behind was out of the question. At least the local vet was a compassionate man. I had often taken 6 strays to him to put down in the English way with an injection, rather than with arsenic as the Spanish custom was. Afterwards, the vet walked 400 yards up the road to where I was sitting in the car and held my hand. I couldn't speak. I just sat sobbing. Throughout the journey home, I could think of nothing but the animals, and I grieved for them a long time. I was helped only by the thought that they had more love than most pets get in a full lifetime. Leslie had found us a flat in an old house while we looked around for more suitable accommodations. When we met our landlord, a vicar, he seemed very nervous and made a point of insisting that we should have no dealings with the occult. We assured him that we didn't indulge in the sort of thing and had no interest in it, which we hadn't. We were all too busy trying to reshape our lives. However, the atmosphere was rather spooky, and some time after we had left that house, I heard it had been exorcised. Some strange things happened while we were there. Once, when I was alone in the house, I left the water running for a bath. I returned to the bathroom 5 minutes later and found that the tap had been turned off. When I turned them on again, the water ran quite normally. Another time, we were all having a meal when we heard a loud crash from the bedroom. The door of the wardrobe had been lifted off its hinges and thrown against the wall. It took 3 of us to replace it. I laughed and said, "Somebody's trying to tell us something." Janet was lying in bed one evening when she was frightened by hearing a man's voice speaking to her. Then the bedroom door opened, although no one was there. Later, when she met her first husband, she recognized his voice as the one she had heard. The memory still sent chills up her spine. My attacks of dizziness and choking were steadily getting worse, and were now accompanied by excruciating stomach pains. They frequently disrupted my life, and were alarming as well as painful. Once, when the palpitations were particularly frightening, my doctor arranged for me to have an electrocardiogram, but the results provided no explanation. I was beginning to feel quite desperate. One evening, I was lying down in the gathering darkness chatting to Janet. Suddenly she exclaimed, "Look, there's a light." I followed her glance. In a corner of the room was a blue light, just like the one I'd seen when Harry Edwards had been sending me healing. It stayed there for about an hour without moving. We watched it, fascinated. I had never told Janet about the first light, and she was very curious about it. I had no idea why it was there, but assumed that it meant there were spirit people around. After a few months, we moved to a flat in Sutton. It was vast, taking up 2 stories and with no less than 3 halls. Our bedroom was like a ballroom. We were able to buy it very cheaply, which was extremely lucky as we had lost most of our money. The stress of running his own business had affected Leslie's health, and he began working as a minicab driver, which suited him much better. I had to work too, despite my attacks. There was no way I could return to singing, so I took an office job. During our 3-year separation, Leslie and I had inevitably grown apart. Now it was clear that our marriage was under strain, which did not improve my health. I felt so ill that I became convinced I was going to die. While traveling to work one day, I was idly turning the pages of a book on hand analysis when I came across an advertisement for a well-known medium, Charles Horry. Remembering that my grandmother could predict the future, I decided to find out whether my attacks were going to finish me off altogether. Scared at what he might tell me, I nevertheless felt impelled to make an appointment with him the following week. I had no idea that this meeting was to mark a complete turning point in my life. That the attacks I had been suffering from had been caused by a buildup of unused energy. That I would be told that, far from dying, I was to live and heal others. My sitting with Mr. Horry left me in a state of total confusion. I couldn't believe that I was a healer. Yet Mr. Horry had spoken with total conviction. I was in no doubt my mother had been communicating through him. I recalled her appearance in Spain and the feeling that she had been trying to tell me something. Since my return, too, I had often been aware of her presence and had even heard her voice reassuring me that everything was going to be all right. Now Mr. Horry had said, "Your mother's giving you something you always wanted, but in a different way." She had known how upset I was when she had stopped me becoming a vet. Perhaps she was trying to make amends by getting me to become a healer. Well, that was certainly different. "You are already healing people," Charles Horry had said. I remembered all the people who had rung up after I'd analyzed their hands and said, "You know that vitamin you recommended? Well, I haven't got it yet, but I felt so much better after seeing you." I had always assumed they felt better because they'd been able to talk to someone. Surely that wasn't healing. When I got home, I went straight into the kitchen where we sat in the evening and told Leslie and Janet everything. They listened in silence, clearly fascinated. Then Janet said, "Trust Nanny to make you a second Harry Edwards." Laughter brought us down to earth again. "What will you have to do?" Janet asked. "He just told me I would be taught, and when I asked by whom, he said it would be automatic. He said thousands of people would be sent to me for healing." After recovering from the prospect of queues of people at our front door, Leslie said, "Well, if getting rid of all this healing power will help you get better, perhaps you should do it." Leslie seemed to be accepting the situation. I was still in a state of shock and wonderment. So far, my experiences had been just that, my own private experiences. Hand analysis had been a relatively light-hearted exercise. The idea of passing on messages to others and having people relying on me for healing became more ludicrous every time I thought about it. I decided to wait and see. After all, I had a living to earn. I said to Leslie, "There was something else. The medium told me he could see a white horse in a field and beside it a man. The man's name was Tom, and he said that Tom was asking me to forgive him." My husband laughed. "Who on earth is Tom?" "I haven't the faintest idea." For several days we tried in vain to work out Tom's identity. Later, the same message was repeated by 2 other mediums. Tom and the white horse became a running joke. One reason I found it hard to accept that I was a healer was that I thought healers had to be holy, and I wasn't. From my days in the theater, I had acquired a rich vocabulary, and my sense of humor was pretty earthy. I was clearly quite unsuitable, and this really worried me. I was more ready to accept that I was psychic. I began to dawn on me that when reading people's hands, I often found myself making accurate statements which were not based on the lines and dots I was studying so scientifically. After talking with Leslie and Janet, I went into my bedroom and sat quietly. I closed my eyes and said in my head, "Look, I've got a terrible vocabulary, and I'm not at all holy. And if you don't think I'm the right person, I think you should leave me alone and go off and find someone else." Immediately, I felt a great surge of power in the room and a sense of spirit people being all around. Even the furniture seemed to move. I thought, this is ridiculous. They obviously don't care what I'm like. That was the first of what was to be a positive onslaught of psychic phenomena, which was to continue for 3 months. It was as if, by accepting that I was a medium, I had released a mental block which allowed a tremendous, almost explosive, opening up of my psyche. I'd seen and heard spirit people all my life, but this was different. From then on, the whole place seemed to go mad. I saw spirit faces everywhere, faces of all kinds and nationalities, on walls, on the carpet, around the television set, coming and going, appearing and disappearing. I could hear people whispering and talking around me nearly all the time. Often this was accompanied by a kind of pulsating energy, which used to make me almost rattle. I didn't understand it at the time, but I know now that this was due to the power of the energy that had been built up in me. A couple of days later, I was chatting with a friend of ours who had been crippled with backache for over a year. I told him about my visit to Charles Horry. He too thought that the idea of my becoming a healer was highly comic. I said jokingly, "Let me try on you," and laid my hands on his back. Neither of us believed anything would happen. I asked if he could feel anything, and he said, "No, but it feels good." Then, "Oh, I can feel some heat." "Can you? Can you really?" I grew quite excited, though I could feel nothing in my hands. "Well, if you think it's worth it, I'll carry on." Then he said, "Good Lord, it's getting hotter and hotter. Your hands are burning." When it felt like time to stop, I asked if he felt better, and he said no. "Well, that was a waste of time," I remarked. "Obviously, I had no talent as a healer." When we next met 2 days later, he said, "Do you know, the pain in my back disappeared the next day and I haven't had it since?" I was more thrilled for him than for myself. Perhaps, after all, I could help others in this way. I soon had an opportunity to try out my powers of mediumship too. Everyone in the office knew I read palms, and a director of a company which shared the same building, a man I'd never met before, asked me to give him a reading. I looked at his palm and heard myself telling him on no account to have anything to do with boats. It would be dangerous. To my honor, the poor man literally had a fit. He slumped to the floor, knocking his head, and passed out cold. I just stood there, dumbstruck. When he'd been looked after, one of my colleagues told me that he was epileptic, and he had just invested money in a small fishing fleet. That evening, I was telling Leslie the story when a lady arrived and introduced herself as the director's wife. I thought she'd come to berate me and immediately started to apologize. I told her the incident had put me off hand reading forever. "Oh, I do hope not," she said. "I've come to ask you to read mine." I had to refuse. There was no way I wanted a repeat performance that evening. When I walked through the drawing office the next day, all the men were sitting at their desks with gloves on. For a couple of weeks, I tried to push out of my mind everything that Mr. Horry had told me. I was 46, I was working very hard, Janet was having problems which needed my attention, and I was already helping people in the evenings with hand analysis. I didn't see how I could find the time to be a healer, even if I had the ability, which I seriously doubted. I was still resisting the idea. Healing simply wasn't me. Hand analysis was logical and scientific. All of this seemed illogical. I thought that a healer was a special sort of person possessed of some magical secret. I didn't feel at all special, and had no idea how healing was done. I used to look at seriously crippled people and read about people with cancer and think, I couldn't do anything about that. It was a long time before I realized that it is not the healer who does the healing, that we are simply vehicles for healing energy or life force, and that other minds are helping us. However, encouraged by my success with my friends back, I did offer to lay my hands on one or two friends with aches and pains. To my great surprise, they seemed to feel better. Despite myself, I was beginning my career as a healer. My life suddenly became extremely busy. In the evenings, after a day's work in London, I would be healing and giving sittings at home in Sutton. The transition was far from easy. Phenomena continued to come thick and fast, sometimes frightening in their regularity and even ferocity. On a perfectly still night, a wind would howl through our room. Sometimes our bed would move. Leslie went out to sleep in the car at 4 o'clock one morning because he couldn't stand it. If I hadn't known I was psychic, I'd have been very worried. And any husband but Leslie would probably have taken me to see a psychiatrist. Among the less enjoyable events was the time when I tried to turn over in bed one night and found I couldn't move. I seemed to be pinned in place by something as solid as a rock. I woke Leslie. As he put the light on, I felt the rock disappear. I know now that it was energy that had built up around me whilst I slept. About 2 weeks after all this started, I was at work in my office when I became aware that I was not alone. I looked up to see standing in front of me a man with a thoughtful face and a shaggy mustache. He was wearing a frock coat and a small metal glasses and was so obviously from another age that I realized immediately that he was a spirit. He wasn't a misty person. His top half looked quite solid, but he seemed to fade out from the frock coat downwards. It was the first time I had seen a spirit I didn't recognize, and I was fascinated. Telepathically, my visitor conveyed to me that he had been a member of the London School of Medicine and wanted to work with me. He also told me his name, but I was so surprised that I promptly forgot it. I couldn't imagine how I could work with him, even if I wanted to, so I took in what he had to say without replying. Then he was gone. Well, that was interesting, I said to myself, and returned to my typing. A few days later, I was in the office again when a voice told me to take up a pen. I found myself writing down further information about the doctor. He had specialized in arthritic conditions and heart complaints and wanted to help people through me. I couldn't understand how he could do this or why he picked on me. At home, I told Leslie about this visitation. I said, "What the hell does he mean? How on earth can I heal people with arthritis?" I still had no idea how healing worked. I put the doctor out of my mind. Meanwhile, the phenomena continued, some of them thoroughly enjoyable. I had never had an artistic talent, yet suddenly, at work one day, I found myself producing rather good drawings of faces. Unfortunately, this gift only lasted a couple of weeks. I had visions of becoming an artist. It seems that this kind of thing occurs during the development of many psychics. It is as if you are being put through a training course and tried out different skills. The ones that suit you are allowed to keep. Evidently, I hadn't passed the drawing test. I was quite open with my friends about what was going on, and they got used to being greeted with, "You'll never guess what's happened now." Only one suggested that I should see a psychiatrist, which I found hurtful. Whatever was going on, I always had my feet firmly planted on the ground. But people are frightened of the unknown. Later on, some of my friends, to whom I gave a lot of clairvoyance and healing, talked about me to people who didn't know me and were ridiculed for it. This bothered them so much that they didn't contact me for some time. Although I was hurt, I knew that, like so many people, they needed time to come to terms with the existence of the paranormal. There were bumps and thumps in the flat, and my bed used to move off its own accord. Objects disappeared and reappeared without rhyme or reason. Before the telephone rang, I would hear it ring in my head and know that there would be a telephone call within minutes. Spirit people were appearing continuously, similar to the misty people I had seen while I was on evacuee, which I found kind of a comfort. I also heard voices trying to communicate with me all the time. The information they gave me was always for others, never for me. Almost daily, I would see a beam of light in the hall, not unlike the teleportation device in Star Trek. Within this would appear people dressed in robes. I found them beautiful rather than frightening, and their presence usually heralded yet another fascinating new experience. In this world of both real and misty people, it was difficult to take in the magnitude of what was happening. I decided to see Charles Horry again for guidance. He reassured me that these kinds of things can happen to anybody who is a true medium. He also said that the phenomena would continue until I was absolutely convinced of the powers that were being channeled through me. You may not like them now, he added, but when they stop, you will miss them. You're going through the most exciting time in your mediumship. Enjoy it. He went on, I understand. You've started healing? I said, yes, but I still don't understand it. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Mr. Horry repeated that I was already healing and was being taught. I should not go to any development group as I could rely on my own experience. Then he began speaking about a doctor who wanted to work through me. I'm being told that you have had information about this doctor before, he said, that he has contacted you. Have you been to see another medium? I said, I've never been to any medium except you. That's very strange because he is insistent that he has already been in contact with you. Suddenly I remembered the doctor who manifested in my office. I really had forgotten about him. Oh, that's what he means, said Charles Horry. He's actually appeared to you. You must carry on working as a healer. Dr. Watson was a specialist in arthritic complaints, and you will have the ability to cure arthritis. I had to make an effort not to laugh. I thought, what on earth could I do with arthritis that doctors can't achieve? My doctor friend visited me twice more soon afterwards. Some of my hand analysis clients used to tell me that they felt better when they listened to my voice, and if they needed help, I would talk to them on the phone. During 2 of these calls, the doctor appeared and stood by the telephone during the conversation. I visited Charles Horry 4 times in all. On my 4th visit, he said, how many times do I have to tell you I cannot teach you anything? Go away and work. I was not to see him again for 13 years. As soon as I began to heal regularly, my health improved. Once I allowed the energy to flow, my choking fit stopped, and I felt on top of the world. I still have to be careful not to get a buildup of energy, since it flows through me all the time. If I stop healing for a while for any reason, I go around healing my plants and my dogs. I know now that it can take at least 12 hours for the energy to be absorbed by the patient's body and used for whatever purpose it is needed. That is why my friend's back wasn't cured immediately. Now, all the energy I had been blocking over the last 7 years was unleashed, and people felt the benefits very quickly. Although our marriage was approaching its natural end, for one thing, we were both so busy we hardly saw each other. In my healing work, Leslie backed me all the way. Just as Charles Horry had predicted, all sorts of people began ringing for appointments, all by word of mouth. Leslie was responsible for many of them. People would get into his taxi complaining about their aches and pains, and he would say, go and see my wife. Pleased patients told their friends. People even began ringing from abroad asking for absent healing. It was quite extraordinary. Equally extraordinary was the fact that they were getting better. Although I was healing successfully from the start, my mind was in a turmoil when I tried to work it all out. I still thought that healing was some form of magnetic energy from myself and not from any other source. I carried out my own investigations over about 2 months and was convinced I was right, until a patient told me that when she had gone to bed she had felt hands on her chest and had gone to sleep very quickly. And another told me that someone had drawn the curtains while she was in bed. Well, that certainly didn't tie in with my theories. I had accepted by this time that I was in communication with another dimension. But I really don't know why I was reluctant to believe that it was an outside force that produced the healing energies, or to accept that doctors who had died were working through me. How did they work through me? Why was this energy channeled through one person and not through another? I didn't want to feel that someone else was in control of me and kept constructing my own theories. only to have them proved wrong. I think this is actually the best way to learn. Having to acknowledge you are wrong shakes up your preconceived ideas and makes you think. Against Charles Horry's advice, I did go twice with a friend to a development group run by a spiritualist medium, but I giggled so much I couldn't go back. Everything was taken so seriously, and I couldn't believe that things were as complicated as was made out. My friend said she was glad when I left the group so that she could concentrate on what was being said. Mr. Horry was right again. It has always been very important for me to find things out for myself, and ever since then, I have stayed away from groups. But there were so many things I wanted to know. My curiosity at last got the better of me, and I visited a psychic bookshop in London. Perhaps I could help myself without clouding my mind too much. It was difficult to choose among the quantities of books on healing, mediumship, and evidence of survival after death. I wondered why this information was not available in general bookshops. It saddened me that the world at large was ignorant of so many remarkable facts because people weren't being offered the choice of reading. Over the next few years, I read everything I could. I rejected quite a lot, but there was enough sensible information to help me understand what was happening. Another way in which I learned was through the information that I was given to pass on. I would find myself relaying spiritual messages that made sense to me as well as to the recipients. It is clear, and other mediums confirm this, that people like me are chosen to do our work. I've often been asked, who does the choosing? And I always answer, I wish I knew, because I'd like to have a few words with him. I was often aware, however, that certain people were training me, particularly when I was healing, including the doctor who had first made contact with me. I saw a lot of him during these early days, and began to be able to communicate with him telepathically. One day I conveyed to him my anxiety that my earthly language made me unsuitable to be a healer. The message I got back was, Betty, if you'd ever heard a surgeon talking while he's operating, or doctors talking among themselves, you'd know their language is abominable. So perhaps they thought they'd got the right woman. I must hasten to add that since I've been healing, my language has automatically been toned down. Other spirits arrived, wanting to work with me. Two of them I have hesitated to write about because I realized that the stories sound so incredible. There was a phase when I began seeing rather frightening pictures of snakes, and I found myself writing a lot of poetry. I was in bed one night when a man appeared and said, I'm William Blake, and I'd like to work with you. It was he who was sending me these drawings. At that time, I had no idea who he was. All I knew was that I thought his picture was creepy. I said, please go away, I don't want this. When a friend told me that Blake was a famous mystical artist and poet, I went to the library to find out more about him and saw drawings exactly like those he had been sending me. After about 2 weeks of being shown these terrifying pictures, I finally said to him, look, will you please push off? I never saw him again. Soon afterwards, a little man arrived, very French-looking with a beard. He told me he was Louis Pasteur. He, too, wanted to work through me. I had heard of Pasteur, but couldn't believe that someone so eminent would want to work through me. He came 3 times before I was convinced. I ought perhaps to have told him I'd be delighted to work with him, but I wasn't really delighted. I was rather overwhelmed and wondered why he'd chosen me. However, I didn't tell him to go away either, and I can only say that each day brought the most incredible healings. I had never seen Pasteur's portrait. Out of interest, I looked him up in the library too, and was fascinated to find that he looked exactly like his picture. Until now, I've never mentioned these visitors to anyone except my family because I feel rather embarrassed about it. I myself am very suspicious when mediums talk about contacting the spirits of famous people. It's a world in which it's all too easy to name drop, but I can only say that it happened. New phenomena kept occurring. One morning, when I awoke, I was astonished to see a large eye looking at me from the ceiling above my head. It was about the size of a dinner plate, complete with eyelids. Intrigued, I stared back. It was a kindly eye, and it gave me a tremendous feeling of peace. It was so real that I pointed it out to Leslie, but he couldn't see it. This eye followed me everywhere I went. It appeared on walls, carpets, and furniture, even on the floor. Practically everywhere I looked, the eye would be looking back at me. Like all other phenomena, I became accustomed to having it around. About 9 months later, I was looking in the mirror when I suddenly saw the eye was identical with my own. I realized that this was the third eye that I had read about, and that what I was experiencing was its opening. I had never before accepted that we have a third eye, but there it was. My eye and I lived happily together for another 2 or 3 years, and then it disappeared. I missed it. I always found it a great comfort. At about the time the eye first appeared, I began to see auras. The first time this happened was a magical experience. We had a caged bird, a cross between a linnet and a roller canary, which we used to let free to fly around the bedroom. It would sing so loudly that Janet, who is also a musician, couldn't hear herself playing her guitar. One day, while the bird was sitting in the window singing, I saw the most beautiful blue light glowing around it. When it stopped singing, this light seemed to be contained within what looked like a pencil outline close to its body. Then, when it began to sing again, the blue aura expanded to about half an inch all around. It was very beautiful and quite awe-inspiring. I have seen many thousands of auras since then, but that one made the most impact on my senses. Soon after seeing the aura around the bird, I began to see auras around people. As time went on, I learned to interpret their colors. I also began to see, as if someone were showing them to me, what looked like tubes running through people. I became aware that where there was a blockage in a tube, that was the area where I should put my hands, regardless of where the pain was felt. Later, through my reading, I realized that these tubes correspond with the meridian lines of Chinese acupuncture. After the first 3 months, the phenomena stopped being so violent and unexpected, though they have continued in various forms to this day. I was healing regularly, and by now I was enjoying it very much. As Mr. Horry had foretold, most of my early patients had arthritic problems. Then, after 2 years, there were 6 months during which I had a spate of patients with Meniere's disease, followed by 3 months of people with visual problems. I was clearly being trained and tested. How this training takes place is very interesting. Some healers stop at one problem and become specialists in that. In my case, I seem to have passed the whole course because I now get patients with every problem under the sun. Over the next few years, I was to see hundreds of cases, some of them very severe. People came who had given up all hope of ever using their limbs fully again. Almost all were able to return to normal activity. As time went by, the time it took to heal them became shorter. Quite often it was instantaneous. Practically everyone could feel a tremendous heat or tingling going through their bodies, and I could feel vibrations going through them. Sometimes the couch seemed to vibrate as well. My hands were automatically guided to the part of the body that needed healing, regardless of the location of the pain. During healing, I would be given information to pass on to my patients about relations who were dead and about the future. I remember one woman with a frozen shoulder who used to write down all this information and date her notes. Her husband was very skeptical, and she was determined to prove him wrong if it killed her. When something happened that had been predicted, she used to get her notes and show them to him. Then she'd ring me up and say, "I told him so." When her shoulder was completely cured, he had to be convinced of that at least, and eventually came for healing himself. Everyone who came for healing became a friend. Whole families came to me, and many of them treated me as their family doctor. I was extremely careful not to interfere with the relationship they had with their GP, but sometimes it was difficult to remain neutral. Most of them were tired of their doctor's negative attitude and with taking drugs which simply suppressed their symptoms. People want to be cured. Several phenomena occurred during the healing sessions themselves. One I thoroughly disliked was the smell of ether, which manifested every time I started healing. At first I thought it might be coming from outside the house, but it soon became apparent that it was emanating from somewhere in the healing room. This manifestation lasted over a period of 3 years. It was unpleasant to live with as the smell pervaded the flat long after I had finished healing for the day. I asked the advice of another medium who said it was sent to encourage me. I hated it. However, it gave patients an enormous amount of confidence since they realized that something special was happening. On many occasions, too, a cold wind would blow through my healing room. The flat was always very warm and totally drop-proof, yet even on a summer's day, I'd have to put a gas fire on. This is quite a common experience among healers. I believe it is due to the presence of a number of spirits which draw on the heat. Another uncanny phenomena was a sensation like strands of spider's web on my face and on those of people I was healing. I would see them trying to remove it from their face and hands. The only explanation I have for this is that these were some sort of strands of energy floating around. There was also a number of times when I became invisible to the person I was healing. After I had finished, they would say, "You disappeared," although I had felt nothing unusual. I have come to the conclusion that this was an effect of the massive amount of energy around me at the time. It would become so dense that it would actually screen me from view in a kind of blue mist. During my years of training, I could feel my mother's presence all the time. In Sutton, whenever I relaxed in my favorite armchair, I would feel her hand gently touch my shoulder. It was very comforting. I told Leslie and many friends, but I never mentioned it to Janet because I thought it would make her nervous. One evening, after I'd been healing for about 2 years, Leslie and I went out to a party, leaving Janet alone with our Doberman bitch, Lady. We returned at midnight to find that Janet had spent the evening locked in her attic bedroom with the dog, quite terrified. While she was watching television in my armchair, a hand had been placed on her shoulder. I told her not to worry. It was only Nanny, and it happened to me every evening. "Why the hell didn't you tell me?" said Janet. This brought home to me the fact that Janet was very psychic, and I began confiding in her more about my own experiences. My mother contacted me in every way she could. Whenever I went to a spiritualist meeting, she would always be up front. It makes me laugh to think that my mother, who wouldn't have been caught dead at a spiritualist meeting in her lifetime, haunted the ones I went to after her death. Janet used to accompany me to these meetings, although she didn't really approve of my going and felt I didn't belong there. I had no desire to become a spiritualist or any other kind of ist, but I was still learning and was interested to see how other people worked. I was often disappointed that public demonstrations of mediumship and clairvoyance came over as a kind of music hall act, and very glad that I didn't have to be a platform medium. 1 or 2 mediums, however, impressed me by their intelligence. It was one of these who gave me a further message from the mysterious Tom with the white horse. I still had no idea who he was. The mystery was solved at last when I caught a very bad flu virus, during which I left my body several times. Opening my eyes at one stage, I saw a white-haired man standing at the foot of the bed. He said, "Betty, please forgive me. I could have helped you and I didn't. It was cowardly." I couldn't believe it. He was the husband of the awful woman I had been billeted with as an evacuee, and of course his name was Tom. I put my hand out to him, but he had gone. And now I remembered the white horse, which used to be in a field opposite the house. Tom was a nice man, and I had always felt terribly sorry for him, even as a child. From that moment on, I began to recover from my flu. Tom had obviously been healing me. In 1982, I had been healing for 7 years. 4 years earlier, I had given up my job to heal full-time, and I was healing all hours of the day. It was hard work, but I loved helping people and was pushed on by the thrill of seeing people get better after suffering so much myself. My private life was less happy, however, and Leslie and I had just agreed to separate when he became seriously ill. He had had worrying symptoms for some time, but hadn't had them investigated, possibly frightened of what the doctors might tell him. While I was in Spain, he and our son Jeffrey made a hang glider, and when they tried it out, he had an accident and damaged his shoulder. This old injury gave me an opportunity to give him masses of healing. Now it turned out that he had cancer of the intestine, requiring a major operation. Fortunately, although the growth was definitely malignant and the doctor said he had had it for years, it was not of the worst kind. I feel this must be because of all the healing he had been given. And just before he came home to convalesce, some tubes which had been inserted in his stomach were removed. 2 days later, one of the wounds split wide open, and we hastily called the surgeon. He said that this was not uncommon and that it would take 6 weeks to heal. He couldn't stitch the wound because the flesh round it was too thin and tender, and we had to dress it with pads from the chemist. I gave Leslie a lot of healing that day. He was sleeping in a single bed beside me. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, he woke up exclaiming, "Jesus, what's happening to me? Look at my arms and legs. I can't control them." I looked, and his arms and legs were moving around all over the place. I knew what was happening because some of my patients had had similar experiences. I said, "Oh, that's good. You'll be better in the morning. You're being given some wonderful healing." "I bloody well hope so," said Leslie. When we went to change his dressing in the morning, the wound had completely healed. We called the surgeon, and after he had examined him, I told him that I was a healer and had given Leslie an hour's healing the previous evening. The surgeon took this information calmly. He said to Leslie, "All I can say is you are a very lucky man to have a wife like that." Leslie went on to make a rapid recovery and has never had to have any post-operative treatment. I'm glad to report that he is still completely well. When Leslie was completely better, we parted company. It was an amicable separation, and we're still friends. Even so, I went through quite a bad patch emotionally and felt very lonely. One day the phone rang. When I answered it, a woman's voice said, "Hello, Betty." It sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. I asked who it was. "It's Mom," she said. Before I could speak, she went on, "We are so pleased for you. We've been watching everything you've been doing, and we're all helping you." Feeling amazingly calm, I asked who all was, and she said, "All of us." "Who are all?" And she said, "Dad's helping you, and Gwen and Elizabeth." It was the mention of Gwen, a friend who had sometimes looked after me as a child, which convinced me this could be no one but my mother. She went on, "Wonderful things are going to happen for you. It is no coincidence that you have been chosen to do this work. We know far more now than we did. You were chosen a long time ago. I know so much now." From what she said, I understood that she was actively involved in helping me. She asked me to tell Janet, who was also having problems, that she was helping her and looking after her. Janet always feels my mother around, even more than I do now. We talked for about 10 minutes, during which she told me about amazing things that were going to happen to me. I just kept saying, "Are you all right, Mom? Are you sure you're all right?" As though she'd been away on a long journey, but I didn't even feel surprised. It was as if I was transported into another but perfectly real world. When I put the phone down, however, I found myself in a state of shock. Had it really happened? When I told Janet, I said, "Don't tell anyone else. People will really think I flipped this time." Recently, I have told 1 or 2 people, and they always want to know whether my mother had to dial our number. It's true that spirit people make a lot of use of electricity, but I've no idea at what point they break into the telephone system. 3 months later, I was browsing in a bookshop, and there in front of me was a book called Phone Calls from the Dead. I bought it and couldn't wait to get home to read it. I was amazed to find that others had had the same experience, including perfectly ordinary people as well as mediums. Reading this made me feel less alone. But when I recall that conversation, I'm still filled with a sense of the miraculous. I stayed on in the huge Sutton flat, and for the first time had to deal with paying bills and the mortgage. It wasn't at all easy, and I worked very hard. People would telephone me for guidance from 6 in the morning till 1 o'clock the next. Some just turned up on the doorstep. Others telephoned from abroad in the middle of the night asking for clairvoyance and healing. It was a mad life. But there was some phenomenal healing going on. I was also supported in some incredible ways. I often worked late into the evening. I would put my supper to cook in the pressure cooker and then, totally absorbed in my healing, forget about it. The gas would always be turned off at the right time and the food would be perfectly cooked. Soon after Leslie left, a bill arrived for 85 pounds, which I couldn't pay, and I was extremely worried about it. I'm an avid reader. When I next opened the book I was reading, there was a 5-pound note there. I thought I must have left it in the book myself, but that week, every time I took a book from a shelf, no matter at what page I opened it, there would be another 5-pound note. I found this as incredible as my mother's telephone call. The notes continued arriving until I had acquired 80 pounds. Then they stopped for 2 days. Then, after doing some spring cleaning, I went to the front door to greet a patient, and there, on the mat, where I had just been vacuuming, was a 5-pound note, making up the 85-pound I needed. I have never received any more money in that way and certainly don't expect to do so. Funnily enough, another phenomena worked in quite the reverse way. Shortly after this, I was asked to attend a seminar in Segovia, and before I left, I bought 16 pairs of stockings to make sure I didn't run out while I was abroad. I put them in a drawer until the time came to pack. When I opened it, every single pair was vanished. I just hoped that whoever received my stockings needed them more than I did. Though we kept in touch, Leslie was no longer my husband. Some other close friendships had broken up for various reasons. Much of the past had been washed away, and I was very alone. I felt rather depressed and very sad. At this point, Michael and Clementina Bentin came into my life. An acquaintance told him that I was in distress state and asked him to ring me. So out of the blue one day, Michael rang me saying, "I understand you're in trouble." I was amazed. Michael has had many tragedies of his own and is a very busy man. I thought it was quite lovely that he should think about helping a complete stranger. After we had talked for a while, I felt my sadness lifting for the first time for ages. Then I said, "Excuse me, but I think your wife is in trouble." I diagnosed correctly that she had a frozen shoulder, and I heard Michael call out, "Clem, you must come and hear this." He asked if he could bring her for healing, and of course I said yes. Although she had been to all sorts of therapists, her shoulder was completely cured after one healing, which was nice. She told everyone she had a miracle cure. The Bentines were wonderful to me. They used to pick me up at weekends and take me to their home. We became very good friends, and I became hooked on Clementina's cooking. Michael is very psychic. In November 1983, he told me, "The man you are going to share the rest of your life with will be living with you before I return from America next May." He added, "It's someone you know already." I said, "Michael, anyone I already know, forget it." He smiled and said, "Wait and see. You'll be living in a cottage in the country." Sometime before I had given a sitting to a businessman. He had been back several times. I liked him, but would never in my wildest dreams have thought of Alan as a suitor. I hadn't seen him for 6 months when he suddenly got in touch with me, this time to offer me help. He felt he owed me a lot since the clairvoyance I had given him had been extremely useful. I met Alan for lunch, and by the following March we were living together. When Michael returned to this country in May, he and Clementina invited us for lunch. When he opened the door to us, Michael said, "That's him. That's the man I saw." Alan said, "Thank God for that." After we moved into our current home in the country, just as Michael predicted, all kinds of phenomena started up again. Objects disappeared and reappeared again, and there have been 1 or 2 other old happenings. Alan has taken it all in his stride. He has also put a stop to my working all hours of the day and night, and encouraged me to write this book. Without his support, I could not have written it. I have now been working as a healer and medium for 13 years. I have never advertised or sought publicity, but as I have become better known, I have been asked to give lectures and teach. I have taught in schools. I have a particular empathy with teenagers and have taken many seminars abroad. Now I have the opportunity to do what I have been wanting to do for a long time, to write this book so that my message will reach a wider public. It is a message about healing, about mediumship, about the survival of the mind after death, and about the most amazing phenomena of all, which I call mind energy. Part 1. Spiritual Gifts. Mind Energy. A quote from Sir James Jeans, astronomer. Mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. End quote. Healing is the most wonderful form of complementary medicine you can have. To many people, healing is a mystery, a combination of mysticism, religious faith, and the miraculous. If there is a mystery, it is only because people choose to make it so. There are logical explanations for most things if one cares to look into them. Healing is simply the transmission of life force, the energy that sustains every form of life. Human beings are first and foremost energy beings. Everyone has energy counterpart, which both occupies the body and extends beyond it as the aura. It is this which supplies life, health, and vitality to the physical body. When the energy system breaks down or it is blocked in any way, related parts of the body cease to vibrate with life force, and this creates ill health in the physical system. Although there are still some skeptics, the concepts of the life force and the energy system are becoming increasingly accepted today. Many of the alternative or complementary methods of healing, such as acupuncture, have been based on these principles for centuries, and those of us who constantly use the work with energy experience miracles every minute of every day. I believe that a full understanding of these energies could revolutionize our attitude to life. We are surrounded by unseen forces, and although most people are unable to see them, they can feel them. When a breeze blows against your hair and face, you cannot see it, but you know it's there. When you receive an electric shock, you cannot see it, but you certainly know it's there. We accept facts and figures on trust from scientists and doctors about the workings of our bodies because we know them to be experts. If only the same approach could be taken to psychics and healers who can see and feel the energy system. My own understanding of energy started from the time 13 years ago, when I saw the wonderful blue aura around our songbird, expanding as it sang, after which I could see auras around everyone. It was fascinating. The colors were all different, and I began to realize that every disability has its own radiation and colors. I began to understand, too, that there is a source of cosmic or universal energy on which mind and body energy are dependent. Healers have an extra supply of this life force, which can be used for the benefit of others. In healing session, it is automatically and naturally transmitted through the healer to the patient, usually by laying hands on them, though a number of other methods can also be used. As the energy flows to the patient, it is replenished from the never-ending supply of cosmic energy all around. Once I understood that I had access to an extra supply of life force, I had fun experimenting with what that energy could do. One day, I practiced for 6 whole hours trying to turn water into wine. I only achieved a hint of pink, but I drank it anyway. Now I reserve my energy for healing, but I have described some of my experiments in the last section of this book so you can test your own energies. What I believe to be my most important realization of all, however, occurred when I had been healing for about a year. This was the discovery of the energy around the head, which is separate and totally different from the aura. One day a lady came to see me for help with a woman's complaint. When I opened the door to her, I was surprised to see a mist around her head. When I looked more closely, I could see that its center had a funnel-like appearance, as though it was being drawn inward and down into the body. I was so struck by this that, as I showed her in, I couldn't take my eyes off it. My visitor must have wondered why I was looking at her so intently. While healing her, I could also see that the area around her brain was congested with obviously negative energy. It occurred to me that with so much pressure there, she must be having mental problems, and I asked her if she was suffering from depression. "Yes," she said, "that's really why I came to see you." The complaint she had told me about on arrival was a result of her depression. I have always recognized the importance of positive thinking and had already written some notes on the subject. I gave these to her to use at home, and in addition to receiving healing, she worked at acquiring a new positive attitude. This helped her considerably. Several healings later, the funnel-like appearance over her head had gone, and the energy was a complete circle radiating outwards. That experience made a great impact on me, and I began studying the energy around the heads of everyone who came to me, and of people everywhere in trains, buses, crowds, wherever I went. It was only after looking at thousands of people in all sorts of circumstances that I came to call this energy mind energy. I am convinced that recognizing the importance of mind energy could change people's attitudes to negativity and positivity the world over. I have seen so clearly the effects of thought on people's physical energy and health, how positive thinking stimulates it, causing the energy to expand outwards, while negativity draws that same energy downwards, eventually causing congestion throughout the body. Everyone who is depressed has the same appearance. It always looks as if the energy is being drawn down in a funnel shape, through the top of the head and down into the body. In every case, I can see how depression and negative thinking come to create an unnatural pressure on the brain, literally depressing and compressing it. I see too how this affects the electromagnetic field around the head, and that if it continues unchecked, it eventually causes congestion in the energy counterpart and alters the body's biochemistry. Yet in only 20 minutes, passing an even greater energy through the body with healing can dislodge the compression and reverse the direction of the mind energy, enabling both mind and body to begin to heal. In a healthy, positive person, the energy pulsating around the head is quite amazing. It surrounds the head as far as just below the ear and is separate from the aura around the body. It can extend outwards ad infinitum, unlimited by space. The ability to see this has brought new meaning to the concepts of open and closed-mindedness. In an open-minded person, the expansion of the energy can be tremendous, whereas closed-minded people literally draw their minds in so that not only are they unreceptive to new ideas, but they have also cut themselves off from the ability to attune to other people and even to nature. Mind energy stimulates the physical functions of the brain, and it is fascinating to watch it expand and contract as someone is thinking. The brain itself is a junction box for the mind. In Seance to Science, Meek and Harris write that Dr. Wilder Pinfield, one of the first brain researchers to begin to raise questions about mind-brain connections, has permanently removed massive segments of a patient's brain, but still the mind seemed to carry on as before without disturbance of consciousness. Similar findings have been shown on a television program on the same subject in which a woman's mind was found to be normal, though 85% of her brain was inactive. A superb illustration of the power of the mind is Christopher Nolan, the young man who recently won the White Bread Book of the Year prize. Despite a damaged brain, he has enabled his powerful, intelligent, and talented mind to fly free, unhampered by physical limitations. When I first recognized the significance of mind energy, I was tremendously excited. If positivity could reverse the energy, bringing about such incredible changes, then this was the secret of a healthy, successful existence. This was the key which we all hold to our own destiny. I encourage people even more strongly to get rid of or at least control negativity. In those who persevered, the change was astonishing. Their mind energy became bright and expansive, positively vibrating. Mediums have always been able to see the energy fields around the body. With the increased recognition of Kirlian photography, which shows these fields on film, they are beginning to be taken seriously. Perhaps in the future, mind energy will also be captured in this way. After all, it has already been captured in art. When I had been studying mind energy for some time, I walked into a church one day on impulse. Inside, I found myself looking at a painting of Christ and at the halo round his head. There were some paintings of the saints with their halos. I looked at these too, in astonishment. It was quite shattering. Like everyone, I'd seen pictures of halos all my life without thinking about them. Only at that moment did it dawn on me that they were identical with the energy I had been studying. Although most human beings have lost this faculty, I believe that the first illustrations of halos were made by artists who had the ability to see the radiant energy of the mind. My understanding of mind energy inevitably influences my diagnosis. Clairvoyant diagnosis is not the same as a medical diagnosis. It is the ability to diagnose the state of the patient's energy counterpart, where the physical problems begin. In fact, I can see physical problems showing up in the energy field at least 2 years before they manifest in the body. And of course, the state of a person's mind energy strongly affects the state of his energy counterpart, and must therefore be included in my assessment. In clairvoyant diagnosis, I view the energy field around the body, the aura, the energy channels flowing through it, and the chakras or energy centers going down the body. I can also see the parts of the body which are under stress, as the energy counterpart occupies the body, taking the shape of the organs. The aura is often described as having 7 layers. I see only 3, but for diagnosis this is quite enough. The very specific aura immediately around the body, which some people refer to as the etheric, is the one I use the most. Its colors are constantly changing as people's thoughts and states of health change, but there are definite patterns relating to particular conditions, and by constant observation, I have learned how particular physical problems show in the energy counterpart. I get an overall picture when people first arrive. For example, if someone arrives after a recent quarrel, the aura will be shot with red, mainly in the mind energy, although red streaks will also appear in the body aura. In someone with nerve problems, the first thing I will see in the aura is a kind of dirty green. In arthritis, the aura contains a dull yellow shade. Some people come complaining of rheumatism or arthritis, but when I view them, I see not this dull yellow but a bright mauve. This shows that the problem is not arthritis, but stress, causing overactive adrenal glands and producing too much acid in the system. Bright mauve is a very common color. The auras of cancer patients often contain a lot of dark, lifeless-looking patches. Dark areas appear in the body, too, where an organ has been removed. The energy still takes the shape of that organ, but is much duller. When I see this, I check whether the person has made an operation. Sometimes they haven't, and then I need to find out what that dull patch indicates so that I can deal with it. Also within the body, I can see the energy channels which correspond with the meridian lines of acupuncture and shiatsu. I believe the meridians were discovered in ancient China by people with clairvoyant sight. To me, they appear as narrow whitish yellow tubes. When I see an almost colorless section diminished in circumference, I know there's a blockage in this area of the meridian, preventing the free flow of the energy. During the healing session, I will work to release this. Then there are the chakras, which some people refer to as energy centers. These are 7 vortices in the energy system which draws in the life force from the limitless supply of cosmic energy in the universe and control its flow through the body. They occupy approximately the same areas as some of the most important organs and glands of the body. There are a number of books on yoga and on the chakras themselves which describe and illustrate this system. If you want to study this subject further, some I can recommend are listed at the end of this book. You may find that books vary in their descriptions of the colors, positions, and functions of the chakras. This is not to say that anybody is wrong. It's simply that people's perception differ. I see 7 main chakras, never more than 2 at a time, according to which part of the body I am working on. Going down the body, they are positioned at the top of the head, the forehead, the throat, the heart, in the center over the breastbone, and over the spleen, just below the ribs on the left-hand side. Then there's the solar plexus over the navel, and the important one at the base of the spine, which is the seat of what is known as Kundalini energy. In addition to these 7, I see a very small one over the gallbladder. The chakras look like whirlwinds of moving energy, roughly circular in shape, although the one at the brow relating to the third eye area is oval. They each contain predominant colors, and any change in the usual color will indicate that something is wrong. During healing, I concentrate on the energy fields until the colors have turned to normal. I'm told that my perception of these colors differs from some traditional accounts. I honestly don't think this is important. If you show the same color to 10 different people, they will describe it in 10 different ways. It's possible that every medium has his or her slightly differing method of diagnosis and set of colors. What is important is to experience things for oneself and be true to that experience rather than parroting other people's ideas. So if your experience is different from what you read in books, stay with your own unique thought. At their centers, the chakras are like whirlpools, constantly drawing in the energy force or cosmic energy all around us in order to support the energy counterpart. When people are ill, 1 or 2 chakras are likely to be under-energized, and these will need attention while I am healing. Sometimes chakras become too energized because while they automatically draw in energy, they don't automatically discharge it. In these cases, the vortices look like tangled balls of wool. Any disruption in the energy system will cause a problem in the physical body, which is the province of medical diagnosis. When a new patient comes, I like to have their medical history and diagnosis before I scan the body to see how far it coincides with what I see. It's surprising how often it differs, not because doctors are necessarily wrong, but because conventional medicine doesn't take the energy system into account. Very often, the outward symptoms of an illness appear in quite a different area from the site of congested energy. Clairvoyant diagnosis, therefore, complements medical diagnosis. Everyone I have given healing to has had his or her energy system blocked in some way or another. The advantage of healing is that a healer with clairvoyant sight can transfer energy directly into the congested area and can cure or relieve so-called incurable complaints by clearing the blockages and revitalizing the energy. The transference of energy opens up the energy channels in the patient's body, which uses it for whatever purpose it needs it. It can take 12 hours for results to be noticed while the energy works through the system. This is the first step to a cure. When it is revitalized in this way, the patient's body heals itself. Although I sometimes speak about curing this or that disease, I view the whole of life first and foremost in terms of energy. So it is more accurate to say that the congested energy causing the physical ailment has been removed. I also recommend healing as a preventative. If the energy system is revitalized 3-4 times a year to keep all the energy channels open, it should be possible to maintain optimum health. Most people assume that healing energy comes from the healer's hands. In my experience, healers draw in and radiate energy out from all their chakras, but especially from the chakra in the navel area. I have tried standing behind someone with my own hands behind my back. The person will still experience enormous heat in their lower back. During a healing session, however, I use my hands as a channel, and most people experience heat or tingling coming from them. In addition, my mind energy links up with the patient's mind energy. Experiments have shown that healers' brain waves pulsate at a very low frequency, and after a while, the patient's brain waves will pulsate at the same frequency. A very simple technique I use quite often is to adjust the aura. Sometimes I will see that a person's aura doesn't extend evenly all around the body as it should. It will bulge on one side and look very thin on the other. So I manipulate it until it's evenly balanced, lightening the areas that are too condensed. I also make sure that it comes down well below their feet. The aura extends downwards as well as all around and above the body. An unbalanced aura can result from shock, stress, or disease. The same thing can happen to the mind energy. Many times, I've opened the door to someone and seen a bulge on one side of his head, like a hat worn on one side. When I ask, "Do you find you're suffering from an imbalance?" he says, "That's exactly what I've come to you about. I can't walk straight." This is because the bulging mind energy makes him feel one-sided and afraid of falling over. People are sometimes diagnosed as having medical or neurological conditions when all they have is unbalanced mind energy, which can be put right very simply. Some people bump into things or describe themselves as clumsy. I've suffered from this myself. From childhood, I was always banging into doors or putting a cup down on a table only to have it crash to the floor. Once I realized what was wrong, I cured myself overnight. It was shortly after that time when I looked in the mirror and realized that the eye I was seeing was one of my own. I saw my own mind energy in the mirror, too, and realized that it was protruding on one side. Feeling a bit silly, I put my hand up to my head and patted it as if it were untidy hair. To my surprise, I saw it moving into place. After that, my clumsiness was gone. Since then, I have regularly treated myself by smoothing out my aura and mind energy. Some people come to me after having every conceivable kind of hospital test without a medical diagnosis being reached. In such cases, clairvoyant diagnosis is a godsend. Many conditions which have baffled medical science are caused by negative energy pressing on a vital spot which undermines the efficient workings of a major organ. Treatment applied to the organ alone does not remove the congestion, which is at the root of the problem, and too often drugs actually cause more congestion within the body. Take, for example, a man who came to me with high blood pressure. Despite being treated by his doctor and eventually by a consultant, his blood pressure had steadily increased. When I viewed his energy system, I could see large areas of congested energy around the abdomen, in the groin, and around the heart. Small areas of congestion were also scattered throughout the rest of his body. I started by laying my hands on his abdomen, gradually easing the congestion and watching it as it cleared. When he came for his second appointment, he told me his blood pressure had already returned to a satisfactory level. He visited me 4 times in all, and when I last heard of him, 5 years later, his blood pressure was still normal. He was just one of hundreds of people I have been able to relieve or cure in which high blood pressure has been the main contributory factor, yet medical treatment has not touched the cause in the energy system. An interesting illustration of the importance of the energy body is the case of phantom limbs, amputated limbs in which the unfortunate person still feels pain. Ask anyone who has had an arm amputated where their fingers are, and they will point to the area and even hold the apparently empty air. They can feel the whole limb because its energy form is still present, and it is this excess energy, no longer attached to the physical, that causes the pain. Using a more powerful energy, the life force can reduce the phantom limb to the size as the remaining part of the physical limb. The pain factor can then either be greatly relieved or completely eliminated. I have demonstrated clairvoyant diagnosis at seminars both in England and abroad. I ask for a subject from the audience and then go through his body from head to toe, giving my findings. I also receive mind pictures of past accidents and operations. Sometimes there have been doctors present who have backed up my diagnosis. Anyone who treats the spine, like osteopaths and chiropractors, will understand the following story. I have taken part in several seminars at well-known public school. At one of these, I was working with a group including 4 of the masters, a doctor, and 1 or 2 other people. One of the masters told me he had been having terrible problems with his stomach for about 6 months. At one point, he'd been dashed off to a hospital in agony. but they hadn't been able to find out what was wrong. I looked at him. I thought I could see what the trouble was, but I wanted to be sure. I said, "Would you mind very much lying face down on the floor?" He obligingly lay down, wondering what I was up to. "It's my stomach," he said. I said, "Well, I want to see your spine." I told him I could see that he had a problem with one of his vertebrae right between his shoulder blades. "What's that got to do with my stomach?" he asked. I said, "To be honest, I don't know, but I know that when it's put right, your stomach problems will go." At that point, the doctor stepped in and said, "My mother was an osteopath and taught me osteopathy. May I just go down the spine and have a look?" He examined the man's spine, came to the same spot and said, "You're absolutely right. Do you mind if I deal with it?" And there and then he manipulated the vertebrae. Afterwards, he told me, "You chose the only vertebrae that can cause pressure on the part of the central nervous system that affects the stomach." He was very surprised because it was obvious that I had no medical background. "I'll tell you something else," he said. "Unless you're an osteopath as well as a doctor, you wouldn't know about that." I've since been told that many of the mysterious pains that people experience in the chest and abdomen may be caused by problem in the spine. The schoolmaster had no further trouble with his stomach after this. I am very careful about what I tell patients during diagnosis. I would never say anything that would frighten them or lead them to expect the worst. Sometimes you hear of healers making wild statements or alarming prognosis. I have been embarrassed to be present sometimes when so-called healers have given diagnoses that were totally inaccurate. When this kind of thing happens, it's not surprising that doctors become wary about healers. It is vital to be responsible about what you see and not to invent what you don't see. Any kind of diagnosis, medical or clairvoyant, is difficult. As a healer, I can only discuss it in terms of energy, negative or otherwise. The important thing is to get to the truth of what I am perceiving. It would be interesting if some further research could be undertaken in which scientists could cooperate with psychics. We're still in the beginning class as far as our knowledge of the mind is concerned. Many more people would benefit if healing were used in conjunction with medical treatment. If there is to be a complete cure, the energy system must be sustained. Problems recur because so often only the symptoms are treated and not the cause. The ideal situation, which I would like to see more often, is when doctors and healers can work hand in hand. One of my doctor patients, who has become a healer himself, has made the following comments. "Unfortunately, there is a lot of superstition associated with mediums, clairvoyants, and healers. Betty has done a great deal of good for a very large number of people, including children with terminal illnesses. Many of the people who have been to see her have found a great deal of peace and inner healing which seems to be lost from our society today. Whatever the British Medical Association would like to say about alternative medicine, healing does in fact work. The doctor is able to use his skills to cure a person, but seems to have lost the ability to heal. In the same way that the cuts on our fingers are healed in the main without the intervention of medicine, our bodies are capable of tremendous healing given the necessary energy stimulus. Healers like Betty are invaluable in that healing process." Meet me at the next video where we continue with the reading of Mind to Mind by Betty Shine, and we're going to learn about mediumship. Please do hit the like button, share this with your friends if they're interested in this topic, and subscribe to the channel.